Good morning. Welcome to the Fully Alive Faith Forum here at St. Mark's for our first of the week twos. Just a reminder about how the Fully Alive curriculum works. The idea is that on the first week of each of these features of human life, we're going to receive a teaching, as we did last week, from Ryan McAnally-Lenz, the Associate Director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, on Jesus' life and teaching with regard to the subject in question. So, last week Ryan was going over the general principles, as it were, of families in Christ. And then the second week, there's a something else. It's an interview, most times, with parishioners in the congregation who we think have some expertise to offer, or a particularly interesting or non-intuitive perspective. That's what we have. That's what we have this morning. Or sometimes it's a workshop, or a reflection, or something of that sort. So the first week is like the general principles, and the second week is, okay, now how in the world are we supposed to make those general principles concrete? And we could not have two better people with us this morning to help us make principles of faithful families concrete in New Canaan, Connecticut. I want to begin just with a word of prayer here. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you that in your Son, Jesus Christ, you have adopted us into your family. We ask that you would be with us to inspire our minds and kindle our imaginations this morning, that all our families might be drawn closer to you and might flourish in doing so. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord. Amen. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Katie Roach and Jenny Ayres. Katie is a licensed professional counselor with loads of experience. She's educated and trained in both psychological and spiritual dimensions of health and wholeness, and works with adolescents, couples, and adults on a variety of issues from anxiety to stress, depression, grief, and loss, and has a great deal of experience. I know this in part because the clergy have a habit of referring people to Katie in difficult circumstances. She is the best of the best here, as is Jenny Ayres. Jenny is also a licensed professional counselor and a substance abuse counselor. She's trained in a variety of techniques also, including dyadic developmental psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy, all of which are incredibly erudite sorts of things about which I know absolutely nothing, except that they actually make people's lives concretely better and have, in my experience, really beautiful. And similarly to Katie, has an emphasis in her practice on the union of body, mind, and spirit, bringing a spiritual perspective so that into therapy, so that the wholeness of the human being is addressed. I thought that we would start here just by allowing Katie and Jenny to say another word about themselves, to explain the perspective that they bring to families, and maybe to say a word about how you have worked with families in your practice.
As I was getting ready for this, reading back over the talk from last week, I realized that those 6 good points that were talked about, they actually make a wonderful basic forum to have in the back of your mind when you are talking with clients, getting to know them, putting the pieces of their life together and trying to understand where exactly are the problems. And I did want to add that I do work with children sometimes as well, which is great fun, and that definitely means working directly with families. Maybe the one other thing I would say is that no matter who I work with, one of the very first things we do in the first few sessions is we make genograms. So we make the map of the family for the person or people who are there in front of us. And so from the very beginning, genogram says family. So we treat families no matter who exactly is in the office.
That's awesome. Thanks, Katie. Jenny? And Jenny, while you're speaking, I'm going to try and adjust the speakers that we cut out some of this weird,
Feedback.
some of this weird noise in the room. Sorry.
So I started working in the addiction field, and I realized that many people that have to manage addictions in their lives also experienced anxiety or anger or disrupted attachments. And so that led me to my work. I focus heavily on attachments and attachment disorders, which is basically how did you grow up in your family of origin, what were those attachments like, and how are you in your current family, and what patterns follow you, what unhealthy patterns as well as healthy patterns. But it's about connection. So I focus heavily on connection. I too start with a genogram when I meet the individual couple or family that I'm working with. And we really look at those patterns because the genogram gives you a little map to actually visually look at. And you can see where there might be family cutoffs or what we call enmeshment, when people are just a little too close. So I work heavily, as I said, with connection. And the way I bring the spirituality piece in is our first connection is with God. And that is a prevailing piece of my work, is how does your faith, and I do work with people that actually don't even believe in God, so it can get a little trickier, but anyway, I work with that. They're not ready yet, but in any event, it's about looking at those connections. And the good thing about having a strong faith is you can always feel connected, even if your family connections are not so good.
So what do the two of you hope for the families with whom you work?
I think that probably the most basic thing that I hope for the individuals and people that I work with is more of a sense of who they are in the world, what did they get from their families, what have they just been open to in their own lives, and an intentional look at the world. Where do I want to go? Where's the next step? How do I do that? Also developing, of course, some ability to be able to do those things. But I think that often once they've arrived at a point where they can be more deliberate, more conscious about the everyday, that some kind of maturity is happening. I find that with many, many clients that really what I'm talking about is going from, how would you say it, like basic factual, I need to get to here, my daughter needs this, to actually reflective thinking. Here I am. What is it that we want to learn? That's why our daughter's there. Is that the right place? Reflective thinking. Who am I? Who is our family? How is my daughter kind of taking pieces of that into the world? Now, that's not going to belong to everybody. There are some people out there who can't do that. And that's okay, too, because they will move from a basic place to a somewhat more elevated spot.
What do I hope for with my families that I work with? The very first thing I think is to help each person I work with understand their divine gifts. I think that helps them know who they are and can ground them. I call that the inside job. And then the outside job is actually learning how to use those gifts and how to interact with the people in your life. And the tricky part is that a lot of us aren't born with skills or haven't had the proper skills modeled. So there is a skills-based piece to this. And I will say that a lot of times people really don't want to start with the inside job because that's the harder part. Mm-hmm. So I start with the outside skills, and then we try to move deeper. And then I actually have almost a third piece. It's the inside, and then it's like your family and the skills in the family, but then it's taking it out into the world, because that is another essential piece. I think Ryan was talking about that narcissism of family, and we don't want to just be in our little capsule of, people that we, tend to be with most often. It's really about spreading, using our divine gifts out in the world and spreading God's love. So.
That's really beautifully put, Jenny. Thanks to both of you for that. I'm glad, Jenny, that you raised Ryan's teaching about the fact that families are meant to be a blessing, not simply to themselves, but also to all of the families of the earth, for the entire world. This was something which last week Ryan, just to remind you, Ryan rooted in actually the covenant which God makes with Abraham. Abraham is invited by God to do something crazy. He's invited to leave everybody he knows, to leave all of his kindred, it says, to leave his extended family, as it were, and to travel into a land he had never been to, into the land of promise. What God promises him is that if he does this, he will make him a blessing. And from his family, by his family, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so Ryan was saying this is God's original intention for family, that families would be blessings not only to themselves, goods not only to themselves, but goods to others, blessings to others. The shadow side, or the inverse of which, is the narcissism of the family, about which Jenny was speaking. I wonder from both of your perspectives, what are some of the major impediments, do you think, in today's world to one's family being outward focused in that sort of way, not to the detriment of the good that the family is to those who are a part of it, but what prevents us in our modern world from fully living into this sense that our families are supposed to be a blessing to others?
Well, one of the things that I've run into in I should say that the counseling center that I work for is in Stamford, and that's my largest base, but we also have an outreach office here at St. Michael's, just almost next door. And with my New Canaan clients and some of the others that I see down in Stamford, I would say one of the greatest impediments is the culture in the, that we're raised in. I hear a lot of young women in my rooms talking about, we're just not sure if this is the right place for us. And they're being so honest with me. This is the honesty that they can bring and say whatever they want, and nobody's standing behind them judging. But they will say that it's a very difficult area to begin to try to get to what is basically really important for them. It's what makes counseling, which makes therapy a very special experience for many people, is you just don't have a lot of space, maybe outside of your church, to be able to talk about things like this. And the society is arranged so that success is being the best. You're going to go to the best college, you're going to go to the best camp, being the best and being successful in a very civilized sense is expected, wanted, and I think the people who come into me in the midst of their pain somewhere, they discover this disconnect, and that can be difficult. Down in Stamford, probably the greatest impediment at times are the different cultures that I work with. Because how these different cultures face the world, what they're looking for in the world, or what their parents are looking for, is a lot different than what they actually come to that they would like. Yeah.
So the impediments that I see, I think it dovetails with exactly what Katie's saying, is the individualism in today's society, the me focus, and sometimes the tribalism piece, which is the word that I used in Ryan's conversation last week about intimacy and loving communion. I see that as community, but tribalism is kind of the opposite of community. It's really circling the wagons, and you're not in my group. You know, it's exclusionary. It's not inclusive. So I think, and the problem is, you know, individuality in and of itself isn't wrong. I mean, it's good to know who you are and to stand up for yourself and all of those things. And yet, there is a lot of isolation. And then when you couple that with that sort of tribalism where people get factioned as opposed to being in community, I think that's what we're really kind of struggling with. So.
I guess I would just briefly add too that one of the challenges is time.
Yeah.
You know, how much time you have with someone, whether they're coming once a week, occasionally, sometimes twice a week, how long they can stay, and so on. Because they start in very different places. Some people come in and they are devastated. They're barely there. And so your work begins there. Others come in, life is going pretty well, but you know, this just happened. So it does depend a lot on when they come in and how long they can stay.
Absolutely. It strikes me that that we're talking about a shared set of themes here, and have to do with tribalism, individualism, the worship of success. Mm-hmm. And it also strikes me that before, when I asked both of you, you know, what is it that you hope for your for the people with whom you work? Various forms of coming to an awareness of something, whether it's coming to a consciousness of the dynamics in your particular family mm-hmm. system, or whether it's an awareness of your inner gifts, which you're supposed to bring to your family, and so on. I wonder. Is there an awareness of God in particular that you believe is helpful to cracking open those impediments to our families really flourishing and to our communities of families flourishing? And the answer very well may be no. I'm happy for it to be no if that's the case. But if so, if there is some kind of a connection to God, some sort of a relationship with God, whom we are taught by Jesus to address as a parent, which is a complicated sort of mm-hmm. thing. If your relationship with your human parents is not so great, but in any case, I wonder what you think about that, and whether you can put your finger on exactly what kind of connection with God is a good one mm-hmm. for a family or for a person in a family, whether it's a good one or not. I hesitate to use those words. Whether it's a flourishing family or not.
One of the things that I think helps me is that when I was trying to figure out what to do when I grew up, after my children were growing up to at least high school level, and that was almost a 3-year process, so I went through it pretty carefully. But what I arrived to was that I could do this counseling if in fact I did it as the hand of God. That's how I could do it. That was what I wanted to be able to imagine. And so I entered a program which offered both bringing you the skills that you needed to be able to pass and learn the exam for LPC, but also pastoral counseling, which is where in the world might someone bring up something which is in fact a God-related thing, whether they've used the word God or not. It also just opened up my feelings of God in the world. God is always in a room, no matter who is in front of me and what they may be saying. And I pray during sessions, not out loud usually, but occasionally, yes. Occasionally, yes. But there are also many people for whom we have absolutely no mention of whatever they think anyway, at this point in their lives. They're not aware of any connection that they have. For me, though, I can see it in there somewhere. I can see something, which I know is God-given and God-loved. And yes, I think the stronger those things are, and not surprisingly, the ones that are strongest come from flourishing families often. Many of the people that I see do not, unfortunately, come from flourishing families. But from family.
That's why they're coming.
And that's why they're coming, usually, for sure. Anyway, I do absolutely believe that God is at work among us and in us. I don't mention that, but if someone in my room brings up issues that they have with church or with their feelings about God or who they are and what they might do, it opens the door to me.
That's incredibly beautiful, Katie.
Yeah,
That's
it's
incredibly
lovely.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Incredibly beautiful. Jenny, what do you think?
So God in my work, and if I can see God in the families and how I do that, how I bring God into sessions. When I worked for a state agency, we were not allowed to bring, that was when I did strict substance abuse work. We were not really allowed to initiate conversation that was spiritually based. If someone brought something up in the therapy room, we could follow the thread. And I followed that strictly. I'm in private practice now, so I bring up God with everybody. And I love how, Katie, you said you pray in sessions, because I pray. First of all, I set up my day where I pray for myself and my clients for the day. And I pray for wisdom and right insights so that I may bring healing to my clients. And I look at each one individually and I put them in this vortex of God's love. And then I start my day. And then there are times when I sit in sessions, and it gets sometimes like, things don't always go well in sessions. I mean, people can get angry. If you're working with couples, they start screaming at each other. I mean, it can be challenging. And I have to remain centered more than anything else. And so there are times where I just picture the Lord behind me, and I take a deep breath, and things tend to go better. So it's kind of cool. So anyway, but I bring up God with everybody. Anybody that comes in, maybe not the first session if I kind of get a vibe that they're not a God kind of person, I don't bring it up. And then maybe the second or third session, I'm like, so tell me about your faith. Do you have a faith? And then some people are like, no. And I said, well, do you believe in anything greater than yourself? And I would say most people say yes. And so then I say, okay, well, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, and see how it can help with healing whatever's going on with you. Did I answer the question?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, and I'm so excited about the answer that you gave, because Katie and Jenny, what you both just described there is not just the way that a spiritual connection can help the families whom you're working with, but also how your spiritual connection, the spiritual connection of the therapist or the counselor, is actually integral to the task of healing too. Which is I'm really excited about that, because one of the missions of Fully Alive this year is to help us to see that all of our daily lives are vocations, that is, missions given to us by God for the healing of the world. Not just priests and people who wear clerical collars, but all of us. And so what you guys are describing is both the connection to God that's integral for the families you're working with, but also for you in their process.
Yes,
wonderful.
And I should say, too, that I do have a time at the beginning of the day as well, where I will pray for myself and pray for the work I do and the people that I will work for. They don't know that necessarily, but it's important for me to get that comfort, to start in the right place.
Absolutely. I have one more question here before I want to take some questions from the floor, and it's kind of a non sequitur to the conversation we've had so far, but it was a part of Ryan's talk about which I wanted your take. Ryan made a very powerful statement, I thought, last time, which is that from a Christian perspective, there is no normative family structure. And this is quite something, given the way that the particular currents in American Christianity have lifted up, man, woman, 2 kids, and a dog as kind of the sine qua non of a Christian family. Anything short of which is going to lead to a maladjusted family, to say the least, or maybe even a sinful or broken family. And Ryan was saying that actually in the scriptures you have zero evidence for this. And he gave the most beautiful example, which was in the Gospel of John when Jesus is hanging, he's still on the cross, and he's concerned about his mom, which I think is the closest in the Gospels that we get to, something which many of us in today's culture go through, which is how to ensure that our parents are taken care of in their old age. I mean, it's really a kind of sweet moment. Here's 33-year-old Jesus worried about what's going to happen to Mary now that he's gone. And what's interesting is that he doesn't commend Mary to any of his biological brothers and sisters who are ostensibly running around. Instead, he looks at his BFF, according to John anyway, the beloved disciple who we think is John. He looks at John and says, "Son, this is your mother," and looks at his mom and says, "Mom, this is your son." And it says from that day, John took her into his household. So there's, this is an extension of Jesus' own biological family, where the water is thicker than blood, as it were. And I wonder if in your experience that rings true. I mean, are there certain normative features of a family structure that are salient to flourishing? Maybe you want to chasten Ryan's enthusiasm for the sort of like God can work through any kind of family sort of thing, or do you agree with him that it's not necessarily the way that your family is constructed or what it's composed of, but something else that makes it flourish?
I think that this is a very key point in the work that I do. In New Canaan, I think probably the most different kind of family is just a single parent who is raising children. Down in Stanford, I see every kind of family. And I would say that, God love them, the grandmother is often the parent. And the parent is elsewhere. She went, or sometimes she comes and goes. But I think that just taking that point, that what is most important is that there is a person there who acts as mother, who, when you come home, will be there. When you have a problem, you can go to her. And the people who are most profoundly ill are the ones where there isn't such a designated person. where there may be people they could get a little of this from, and that they don't have that mother, whoever that mother is, the grandmother, the father, and a grandparent, whoever that is, that they don't have that one person, so that when they come in with anything, they are welcomed with open arms and come on in, and listening. People often don't listen. You don't listen. You hear words coming, and already you're composing your answer. Whereas real listening is, tell me, and together we'll think about this. We'll give it some time.
Beautiful. So if I'm hearing you correctly, if I'm listening correctly, you're saying it's about your connection with a figure, a maternal figure, a parental figure, rather than whether or not they are whether they're the biological equivalent of that figure. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
It's really, that's incredible. I mean, that's incredibly important, and I think it takes stock in today's world, the many different forms and shapes which a family can take, and it also explains why, Jesus doesn't say from the cross, people just go live with each other or something like that. He says, Mary is now your mom, John, and John is now your son. So it's still using these these connections, these kinship connections, even though they're non-biological in character.
Exactly.
Jenny, what do you think?
I agree with Katie, and I think it's really about, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, attachment. And I think if you have a solid attachment figure, that is your family. And it can, be a parental dyad that's the attachment figure, so you have a mother and a father. It could be a grandmother, it could be just a mother, it could be just a father. And I actually work with a lot of families that are either blended families, so then you get the step-parents and stepchildren, and I work with a lot of adopted children. And so they have their attachment to their adoptive family, but many of them also have a yearning to know more about a biological attachment. So it gets a little tricky at times, but it really is about that attachment, and that's why bringing spirituality in is so important, because I keep saying our primary attachment's to God. So, that's the real stabilizer. But families are created through attachments. And I love what Katie said about listening, and that's such an important piece of it. And I just wanted to add that I think what really helps in families to keep the attachment strong is being able to repair when there is a disrupted attachment, in whether it's just a small argument about something or a big blow up or divorce or whatever it might be. It's about learning to repair from those wounds, because we all wound each other. So,
that repair is a very key point, that you listen. No one's going to change until they've been heard. So if you can listen well enough, and then if you could work on repair. I mean, that is also something that's at the basics of the work that we do, is how people get through things. What strengths do they have? What do you see operating inside of people that can take them to a healthier place?
And what's interesting about that repair piece, I was hearing in my head, it's about forgiveness, and in that repair. But it's so many people are all about well, I don't know if I can forgive that other person and all. But there's a big piece of forgiving yourself too, in repair. Because I always say it's a dynamic. Whatever's not happening well in a relationship, it's a dynamic. It's never one person's fault. And I don't like to use the word fault exactly, but anyway. Yeah, it's about forgiveness, self and others.
Thank you both. I have so much that I want to say about everything that they just said, but I'm going to resist because I want to get you guys into the conversation. Anybody here with a question for Jenny or for Katie? They're off the clock. This is all free, apparently. So here we go. Please wait until you have the mic.
Oh, that's cute.
So I'm looking around the room and I'm going, gee, we're all done with our core family, right? It all looks like. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic that many of us struggle with because, you know, how do you then continue your core family, and how do you build out other support structures around yourself, or, you know, because that is such a huge part of your life for so long, is having a family. And I just think it's something no one really addresses, like how do you transition into being a non-parent or an older parent, and how do you establish your new role in how that works?
Well, that's an extremely important part of life, is what happens towards the end of it, you know, the latter part. And it used to be not that long ago where you got to a certain point and you were kind of parked. You know, you were just sort of parked in the section of the house or wherever you were, thank you. And now you were the older person. And that doesn't really happen, at least as much. And so you do want to find a way to make that last part for yourself and your family something that, you know, you can look back over with those 6 points at the end of the day and go, I'm happy with that. I feel good with that. And what exactly the combination is, what you feel like you want to move towards. What I'm doing now is actually a late in life profession.
Mine too.
Yeah. We trained together and knew each other, and you came in a bit after me, and we graduated together because I was, long story. But it's not easy. And in fact, I have had people come into me to say, I have this problem. I have this family that's left. I have this part that's there. I feel good about that, not about this. And I don't have a job anymore. What am I going to do? I don't see myself in the garden. Anyway, they will come in and try to figure out what works. You know, what do you want to try? And some people are extremely enthusiastic and physically enthusiastic for a while, so something that fits. Some are not at all. And so you find things that will fit who this person is. But honestly, life is difficult from beginning to end. And you work on it. You really do have to work on it to make that part of your life be good.
So I just have to share my calendar quote, which I'm not going to get exactly right, but I flipped my calendar in my office to October, you know, the other day, I think on October 2nd. But anyway, and there's a quote by Voltaire that says something like, life is a sinking ship, and we have to remember to sing in the lifeboats. And that's what came to mind when you were saying life is hard. So I was like, okay. But back to, you know, being an empty nester and, you know, being in at that time of life where you're not raising a family and you're not surrounded by, you know, family all the time. I see a couple of different things. First of all, I think it's a loss. It's a change. You know, life is a series of losses. Every chapter, every book that we close and we open a new one, I would honor the loss first, and then once you're a little bit comfortable with that, the fact that this is a new phase, then if you can draw on the energy from your divine gifts to go out in the world. Erickson puts the stage of life he words it generativity. And what it is really going out and giving of yourself, and you will create new communities for yourself where you'll thrive. But there's a lot to slog through before you get there. It is really reconciling, where you are in life, and then, really coming into your divine gifts. And there can be a lot of challenges along the way. But that's what I see as kind of the basic way to go.
I think we have time for about one more here. Zuhair and Kavort, do you want to negotiate it between the two of you? Kavort, right.
I've been trying to understand. I come from a Middle Eastern background, married for 55 years to an English lady. So I see a big difference in connections. In the Middle East, it's a tribal, so grandmother often more or less sort of brings up the child, and then you keep friendship with your classmates of 50 years. While I see in the Western culture, even my daughters, they don't know their third cousins, and they're not even interested in it. I always wondered what makes them. I thought maybe if I put them all in one room, no, I did that for many years. I made them all live in one room so they can borrow each other's coats so that it binds them together. I think that seems to have worked as far as within my daughters, but it certainly doesn't work with the extended family, which is I'm not saying extended family is that easy, because they often interfere in your affairs as well. So but it's more difficult to manage. But certainly it's a support system that I find in the Western communities, it seems to have not the same strength. Everybody's more interested in independence and privacy, and that's it. Maybe you could explain what do we need to do to get that free?
I think what I'm hearing, and I'll just focus on quickly, is culture and the power of it, and what you're growing up surrounded by, and how the norms are formed by a culture. And in our community here, and certainly in Stamford and Wilton and elsewhere, there are many cultures and there are many, many families who have so many questions about, I don't understand. It used to be about this, and now we're here, and now my children are there. And actually, a lot, that comes in with people as a part of something. How do I communicate? How do I make this known? One of the things I might say is, be the change you want to see happen. That doesn't always work, but sometimes.
Jenny, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think the challenge is that each family can find, there are all these different cultural aspects, absolutely. And so for me, the question is, what is right for your family? And to figure that out. And I think that, and that's, I keep going back to the God piece, but that's where I think you get the answers, because I truly believe that if you are in the divine light, you will be led to the answers that are right for you.
It's beautiful. Thanks to you both. Our conversation this morning has been a blessing to us, to our family in Christ. Thank you all so much for being here. Next week, Reverend Elizabeth is going to lead us in week 1 of money. That'll be fun. I'll be out of town too, as will Father Peter, so she'll get to say exactly what she thinks, which will be it'll be wonderful. So please do join Reverend Elizabeth next week, and we'll see you in church. God bless you.